All right. We are live. We are live now. We are live now. Yes, we are live. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jaquise Moore. I am the parent and I guess the person who started this. I can't really know the name of a founder or something of Learning with Jasmine. I want to thank you all for coming online. This is our second Let's Chat live broadcast with professionals, not just me. All right, I have a good friend of mine that's coming on here. I want her to introduce herself and her title. And we're going to be talking about special education. So share this, please. Any insight for you or your family, your friends, please share the link later on when we get to finish. All right, so please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I am Jocelyn Watson. I work for Montgomery County Public Schools as they call us a resource teacher for special education, which ideally means that I oversee the special education department at a middle school for the county. And it's my job to, chair meetings, to be collaborative with the staff and the case managers and the parents, to ensure that the students are getting their services and supports within the building.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. All right, so we're just gonna get started. We have lots of questions, a lot of things that we need to, address. So we're gonna get started with this. Now, Jocelyn, what is special ed? What is special ed? A lot of people probably heard that before and don't know. And who qualifies for special ed?
Okay, so special education is it's educating students based on their individual needs and profile. So it's planning in a very systematic way to implement programs and supports and services, and then monitoring it on an ongoing basis to see if it's effective, what needs to be changed, whether they're making progress on goals that have been identified. It's also adapting materials that the school has provided in terms of the curriculum. It's making settings accessible to students. So for students who have physical challenges or visual needs or hearing needs, it's just adapting that setting. It's really to make sure that the students can have full access to their learning. So what does this individual student need based on their individual learning profile? I hate saying disability because it just is so negative. So I always say, what is this student's learning profile? How do they learn? What is their style? What do they need so that they can access their learning? And that's really what specialized instruction means.
I like that. Instead of saying disability, you say profile, because it doesn't really define who that child is. That whole child, that's early childhood, that's the piece that I used to have in early childhood, right? That whole child, the physical, the social, the emotional, there's a learning process, the language, everything. And now you have this service that will fit their need, that will help them be successful and not just like, okay, well, disability, let me throw them to the side type of thing. But the profile, I like that.
Yeah.
Never thought about that.
A personal philosophy of mine, when I got into special education was always like, everybody can learn. We just don't all have the same pathway to that learning. So what is the pathway that you need to learn versus what I need to learn? We all are going to arrive at that same learning, but we get there in a different way.
Yes. So it might take someone who, 2 steps to get to that part, but it might take them, somebody else might take them 5 steps to get to that part. But at the time, they're going to arrive. I like that. I like that. Yes. So we learn about special ed in general. Another way that you can say special ed is, um, they used to say special needs. We don't say that anymore, right? We don't say that. We don't say like you saying disability. We don't say that anymore because it has a negative effect on individuals, parents, even kids. Oh, it seemed like, oh, something wrong with me type of thing.
Yeah.
This autism page, and I always make it known that you know it's just, it's just a title of what they say, but what does God say? And so it's God is bigger than whatever we're going through, and even it comes down to children. Um, we have the resources available in the country. We have the resource, no matter where you live in Maryland or Texas or California, you have the resources. And so it's very important just to know. So Google maybe Texas, what, special ed, or, New York special ed education, or whatever your county is. That's very important to know. Public school, private school, even if it come down to your home school, you can still talk to your child's pediatrician, and they will have a lot of resources available for you. Okay, so the other questions are, what disabilities are covered by special education? What does least restricted environment mean? Those are some of the things that we're gonna really go into IEP later on at the end, but that's what they're gonna be talking about. So this is very important to know.
Okay. So special education, like under the big umbrella of the law, right, which is the Individual Disabilities Education Act. Like that's the law that the protection is under, and where all of these pieces for special education are defined under. So under that umbrella, there's 14 designations. So from speech language impairment to intellectual disability to specific learning disability, other health impairment, autism, developmental delays. There's a bunch of them that kind of are under that designation, and there are characteristics that lend to those different areas that are identified for students. So, through testing and through like a diagnosis, that's one way to sort of identify the student for those needs. The other way, in terms of getting access to specialized instruction in a school, is to look at, what is the educational impact of this disability? So, I might have a speech language impairment, but is it really impacting me in my learning at school? Right. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And how do you sort of make sure that the student has access to their learning? So LRE, so going into LRE, right? Like the student has been identified as a student with a disability. When we're looking at least restrictive environment, we're looking to see like what setting can this plan that we develop, which is called an individualized education program, right? That we develop as a team, where can this be implemented to make sure that they still have access to their peers? So that's what least restrictive environment is. What setting? So you're looking at where can this student receive the most appropriate education services while still having access to their general education peers, right? We don't want to restrict that time from them. So when we're looking at services, we're always looking at a continuum. We're looking at the least restrictive, which is where they have full access to their peers, which is in a regular classroom.
Right.
So can this IEP be implemented in this regular classroom, by a general ed teacher with the supports of a special ed, teacher, but they're still kind of fully included in that setting. So that's that continuum. Then you go, a little further. Well, do they need some self-contained options? Maybe there's, a couple classes where they need more focused support. And so that class or that setting might just be with a special ed teacher, and there might be other students with IEPs in that classroom. But
Right.
it could still be in a comprehensive school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they still have access to their peers during lunch and electives and PE and their other classes. And so as you go further down, you're looking at, do they need a separate program or a special program that's not directly in a comprehensive school,
Mm-hmm.
but is much more focused and much more specialized, to students' disability needs. There could be a program that just works with students with autism. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very specialized in terms of, the staff training and the resources that are available to them. And it all kind of addresses those needs that, students with autism might present, right?
Right.
So that's the continuum of services we're looking at, where least restrictive is here and
Mm-hmm.
most restrictive is on this side, where you've kind of moved them away from that.
Mm-hmm.
IDEA definitely wants us to sort of consider this first, because that's, the gist of the law is to educate and instruct students to the extent possible with regular general education peers. They're non-disabled peers.
Right. Now, for those of you who do not know, what is IDA, so we can go along with.
So that's the law, right? That's the law that all of these protections come under. So a student with a disability is protected under the law called Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
Yes. And by the way, parents, you have that right. We're going to talk about IEP again. IEP is the main reason why we're doing this, because I think a lot of times we don't know, the parents don't know. I didn't know at first. But then of course, when I was doing education, early childhood education, I kind of knew a little bit about it. But IEP as a parent, we're going to really dive into that like later on about your rights. You have rights as parents. It's not just the educators, right? Right. You can go along with that later on when we go. Yeah, it's so important to know those programs. And there's so many programs within that program. Like, for Jasmine, it was the Learning Center. So, this is like hands-on type of thing. When she was in pre-K kindergarten, it was a different center. So after she has mastered that program, they trying to figure out, okay, what's the next step? She can't go into a regular classroom right now with one teacher with 20 kids. That's just too much. It's overwhelming for her. So these are the like different programs, at least restricted to the most. Can you dive into like approximately how many kids and versus the teachers?
So, in a typical general education classroom, you're looking at 20 plus students, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of students. The student teacher ratio is low because there's one teacher that is, instructing 20 plus students.
Right.
When you go to a more self-contained classroom, you might have a special education teacher, you might have a para educator in there, and it still might be an inclusion setting where the student is in a general ed setting, but you've got the teacher ratio is a little bit higher.
Mm-hmm.
Because now you have a second teacher, you've got a para educator in there who's like a teaching assistant,
right,
in the classroom. When you go to the more restrictive placements, the ratio gets smaller. So like the student ratio now is smaller. The teacher ratio might be increased, right? So it might be 2 to 3 teachers to 9 students.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at more services, that is you can provide it in a much more direct way when you have more teachers and less students.
Right.
Yeah,
and so like pre-K, it was about 4 teachers with Jasmine with 6 kids. So you can tell by, the number, and that was like more like the most. but over time, I guess they were trying to figure out like where was she really placed, because her main concern, her main thing was the language more so. It didn't it display a lot of, I should say, autism until like at age 7. So it was a different type of service. It was mainly like, making sure that she knew how to say door and car and, just identifying things. And so it was like you know, one or two students that was sharing, the teacher's attention, which is, you know, it could work for some, it could not work. There's no particular category or program that's always only for that person. So just be mindful, and for that there's so many different categories, programs, and one is not better than, is for your child's learning, than someone else. Okay, so we're going to dive into the next question. What strategies help special education students in the general education classroom? So now we have gone to, let's say we have gone to, now we're going to go to the regular classroom. So, for those who may not need those services that you were just talking about. So now you get to maybe middle school, which is different from elementary, and is different from high school to middle school. What services you know, are there for children who may not have like, the most restricted, but be in the classroom with 20 kids?
Okay. So, there's always general best teaching practices, that teachers, in terms of their pedagogy and what they learn in their training, they have. So they're always pulling on those when they're planning lessons.
Mm-hmm.
When you're planning lessons, you're really looking at your classroom structure and trying to figure out what do these kids need so they can be successful in learning this material, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a classroom that has special needs students, let's say in a general ed setting, you're really looking at, like, let's just say, for example, you're getting ready to read a text, right? You're getting ready to read, now that I can't even think of a book name, but a book, just say in English language arts, they're getting ready to learn a book. I'm thinking about, what do the students need in this classroom? Do they need digital text? Do they need audio? Who needs audio materials? Who needs, maybe larger font size for this book, right? Who needs maybe just a one-on-one, reading, like a human reader to sit with them and just read through this text? Who needs chunking of this text? Like who needs, half a chapter to focus on, just so they can kind of really glean, their understanding on this chapter before we move on to the next text. There's so many things you can do, right? But as a teacher who has special needs students in that classroom, I'm looking at that IEP, because that IEP really defines what the student needs in order for them to have access to your teaching and your instruction. So, and I have to honor that, because that, like we're going to get into, but it is a legal document that I have to make sure is being implemented in my classroom. So, that's just an example, in language arts. In math, it looks different, Do these students need manipulatives? Do they need, to make this concept more concrete, do they need something physical to kind of move around and to, see and touch? Do they need a graphic organizer to maybe plan out their problem solving, Do they need a calculator, just to check their understanding? So there's so many different things that are outlined on those IEPs. The best teaching practices for teachers, I always say, you have to consult with a special education teacher for your students. When you don't know, you're going to build barriers for them. And that's kind of what this plan is trying not to do. So if you don't go to the plan first, and if you don't consult with your special ed teachers, you're going to build barriers for the students. And then you're not providing access to them. Right.
Right.
So I mean, that's always their first step. You know, in our most buildings, you know, there's lots of collaboration going on. Teachers are not working in, you know, like in solo little situations. There's
Right.
a team of people that are coming together when they're planning ahead for lessons and looking to see, you know, what do we need to put in place. You know, we're trying to figure out what we need to do to create that equal access,
Right.
you know, for students. So that lens of the special education teacher is so important, you know, to that process.
Right. And I also want to tie into their middle school and high school is a little bit different when it comes down to if they need the services for one-on-one. It might be an actual peer educator that is transitioning from middle school and high school. They transition from classroom to classroom. So that one, if they need that support with that one-on-one, there is a peer educator that is scheduled to go with Jasmine every single class, everywhere she goes. You know, she go to science, she go to that, go to math, she go to reading, whatever the case may be. They're going from one classroom to another with your child. So that's very, you know, something that you can tie into compared to an actual classroom.
Mm-hmm. And there's other
Okay.
things, you know, even with the transition, just like, you know, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about, you know, some of the kids in my school, in middle school, you know, I don't want to walk with an adult. You know what I mean? You know,
Right.
it's like, you know, why are you following me? So, you know, we try to come up with other things too to get them to transition because it is, you know, one, it could be a safety issue, you know, it could be just overwhelming in terms of the sensory, you know, input, like when everybody's transitioning. So it different students react differently to that, what that transition looks like. So it could be
Right.
just like, you know, we sometimes will do, you know, when a student leaves a classroom, we say, okay, you have, you know, 3 minutes to get to your next class. When you get to that next class, you know, teacher is checking off, you know, you've gotten it. You know, just there's different strategies to use.
Right.
A one-on-one is one of those supports that's considered pretty restrictive to the student. So you're looking at students who really need that individualized support. Like you know, we're seeing in our setting that the adults are providing a lot of support to the student on an individualized basis. And so that's where we're collecting that data to support. Like we really need somebody, you know, to support the student on a one-on-one basis. And then we're requesting for that critical staffing, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And what are self-contained classroom inclusion and out of district placement? What does that
Um,
mean?
So self-contained classroom, like I think I was describing before, it means that self-contained means everyone in that classroom either has an IEP, you know, is specialized to service IEP students, so paraeducators and special education teachers. So the focus is very IEP based. You know, you know, this is where a lot of those goals that are implemented on the IEP that are maybe more social emotional or, you know, social interaction skills or even like some of those executive functioning skills, that's where some of that stuff is worked out in that specialized small group setting, is what we describe it as. Special programs that are kind of outside of the school district, that is at that very other end of the continuum of services. And it takes a whole process to sort of get us to that table to discuss those services, right? Like we've exhausted
Mm-hmm.
our resources in the general ed setting. We've moved to this next level of support. We've moved to this next level of support. And we were just really not seeing the progress that the student really could make if there was a whole self-contained program built for this student. So we're at the
Mm-hmm.
central office table at that point. We've, you know, collected the data that we need to collect to show or to demonstrate that, you know, despite all of the modifications that we have tried to provide in the general ed setting, the student still is not able to make progress with that and needs a fully self-contained program. And
Mm-hmm.
there are, you know, other programs are called non-public schools that are not tied to, you know, Montgomery County public schools or any county public schools
Right.
that could be considered. once we have exhausted our resources.
Right. And I wanted to add with that is out of district 2 means your area of where you live. So if you live on 8th Street and 8th Street School does not provide the services or cannot provide the services, then your child will be bused to Z school, right? So whatever that schedule is, they will be bused to Z school, and you will have they will have the services in the Z school. So out of district also means the location where your location of where you live, where your home school, where your neighborhood that has a school or close by has a school, and they cannot provide the services for your child, you can be bused to the other schools that will have the services. Maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's an hour away, you know. But as far as transportation in the public school, private school is a little bit different. We don't private school different, you know, maybe not even have the services, or maybe they do. I don't know. And maybe they don't have the services to bus your child. Okay, that's something to really think about. But this is talking about public school, is that, you know, they will provide the services, the transportation for you.
So if there is a student student with a disability that is in a private school, let's just say one of our church schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the parents still would like to receive some services through the county, they could still do that through a service plan. Transportation is not included in that situation. The parents would have to transport their student to the neighborhood school and receive services. So, you know, some parents might opt to do that, especially for like the related service pieces, to get
Right.
you know, speech therapy, or even to, you know, have their child participate in like a, you know, research-based reading program or something like that, for those supports. And so there is still some access, and it's very limited in how that IEP is implemented. That's why it's called a service plan.
Mm-hmm.
It is, you know, a smaller version of an IEP.
Right. Right. Okay. So what are accommodations and what are modifications?
Okay, so, you know, I was mentioning some of them earlier as examples, and really there's just, you know, what aids and services and modifications will allow access for students. So this could be physical access, it could be staff support, it could be special equipment, it could be, you know, adapted materials. You know, you're really looking at what do we need to put in place for this kid, this student, to
Mm-hmm.
have access, right? So it could be, you know, modifying the content. It could be creating a setting that's optimal for the student's learning. So let's just take, for example, a student who has, maybe he's wearing some hearing aids. You know, he's got a hearing impairment, or he's, you know, deaf or hard of hearing, and, you know, because of that hearing aid, you know, sound is amplified, and it doesn't sound very good because we've got tile floors and cinder block walls, right, which bounce sounds around way too much.
Mm-hmm.
So we might need to create that setting where there's, you know, walls that absorb that sound for the student, or, you know, he's sitting, or he's, you know, the teacher is wearing a device that amplifies the sound for that student, and he doesn't have to wear his hearing aids at that time, you know. So there's different things that you're looking at, because you really want to make sure that the setting and the content that the student is accessing is adapted to their learning needs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's what supplementary aids and accommodations are. Accommodations are provided for any kind of state and district testing that the students might be taking. So if they need extended time to complete like a timed test, or, you know, like our state testing, the MCAP is, you know, timed. I think it's like 75 minutes per session. And so we have to think about, when a student is taking tests in their classroom, do you see them needing, time beyond what's given? And so if that's what we're seeing, then we make sure that accommodation is available to them in their IEP. They could have time and a half. They could have, a full extended time of whatever the given time is. So if they get 30 minutes, they can have an additional 30 minutes, or time and a half would be, 15 minutes. They could have audio materials. They could have a calculator available to them. They could have, the material read to them. Everything is about qualifying the student based on the need that they are presenting. So it's going to look different for every student. It's going to, like we were talking about, their learning needs and their learning what fits for that student to access. So that's another part of that individualized education program that is outlined and developed together as a team, to determine their access. So that's what supplementary aids and services are, all sorts of classroom modifications. So any teacher, any classroom setting should be able to provide these accommodations and these supplementary aids. Accommodations can be provided for instruction, but it's really geared towards, when they're being assessed. A lot of assessments are created in a very constricted format. We're not taking into account, some of the other needs. And so that's why these accommodations are put in place for students, because we still want them to demonstrate their understanding of their content. It's just not going to look, in the typical way of the way that it's being presented.
Yeah, so adapting, modifying, accommodating, those are things that is very, as far as the parent is concerned, with the questions, hey, so how can you accommodate my child? Those are the key. These are some professional words that if you don't know, so that's why this is a really good chat, because these are some words that you will always hear. And if you don't know what these mean, at least it's restricted or whatever. So we're gonna go down. This is where we are. This is the icing of the cake, where you're gonna hear these words. And if you don't know, but now you know, right? Now you know these terminologies and know what this means. IEP. This is the icing right here. And then we're also going to be talking about, Jocelyn's going to basically tie it on home to, I'm going to say this and I'm going to say it again and again and again and always. It is not enough to have your child have these services and don't emphasize it at home. Like, these are the things that we have to, okay, she's in speech. What did she do today? Okay. All right. Or what did she do? What's she going to do next week? Ask those questions. It's very important, because really in school, it's like, what, 30 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 times a week for speech, OT, PT. If I'm going to say Jasmine, because, that's an example always. But Jasmine before, had issues with jumping. So if I didn't practice it, if I didn't practice that with Jasmine at home, that 30 minutes a week was not going to cut it. If I don't say, okay, let's jump, then that's 30 minutes only for 1 week. So it's very important. So Jocelyn's going to talk about IEP, and then we're going to talk about bringing it home for you guys, parents, grandparents, uncles, guardians, teachers, even general ed teacher. By the way, general ed teacher may not know about special ed. Not fully. So it's so true. So this is very important to know. So I'm gonna let you have the floor with that. IEP, what is it?
Okay.
Look like it.
So an IEP, it's a legally mandated document. It is the outline of the program that we're developing for this student based on their needs. And when we say we, it is a team of
Mm-hmm.
people, which includes the parent. So it's not, we are not creating a plan and then bringing it to you and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. That's not how this works. At the IEP development meeting, you might receive a draft of proposed goals and services and supports, and you should get it, in advance of the meeting, 5 days in advance, legally mandated, for you to be able to review it, for you to provide feedback, for you to, ask the questions that you might have about that document. And at that meeting, you're a part of that, as a parent, you're a part of that discussion about what is going to be implemented on this plan. From goals to accommodations and services, supplementary aids, services, LRE, all of that is discussed. Nothing should really be predetermined. That's why it's a draft that's gone home, right? These are some proposals that we have come up with based on the present level data that we have for the student. Just to backtrack, just like as a myth, not every child who struggles needs an IEP. They might just need some good classroom teaching practices. And so we're thinking about students who have, the formal diagnosis and have that major educational impact in terms of, having access beyond these general classroom accommodations and really need some specialized focused instruction, okay? So an IEP has, I was talking about goals, right? So the team would develop some goals to work on with the student for that year. It's an annual cycle. An IEP has an annual cycle. So during that year, we've developed some goals that the student is going to work on based on the areas that they have needs in. So it could be reading comprehension. So, we could be working on identifying main ideas, because in the present levels, it was determined that that's an area of struggle for the student. And so as a goal, we've come up with, an achievement criteria. We've come up with some objectives that the student is going to work on so that they can meet this goal. All goals are sort of grade level based because we're looking at, the curriculum indicators to pull the goals off of, because we want them to still perform at where they're supposed to be, right? Like that's where we're trying to get them to be. And when I say stakeholders, it's, the case manager, it's the general education teacher, because they're that expert on how this really plays out in that classroom. It's the parent, because you guys, we know our kids, as a parent I'm speaking to, like we know our kids, we know what it looks like. And the special education teacher, if there's any related services that are identified, for speech or occupational therapy or counseling, even transportation, like that's part of, the plan. Do they need specialized transportation? Even if they're going to their home school, is it hard for them to ride on a regular school bus? And do they really need that specialized transportation? Or we're going to have
it's a different type of seatbelt that actually will hold your child and will not hurt your child, by the way, but it will hold and secure your child, because maybe your child is, to protect them is to hold them, to garnish them, to have them hold so that they won't get up in a seat, because again, most buses don't have seatbelts.
Right. And so once the IEP is implemented, agreed to and implemented, the case manager and the general ed teachers are the ones that are responsible for implementing the IEP and collecting data on those goals and reporting progress on those goals to parents every quarter. The IEP is a living, open document. So anytime something is not working, we're back at the table. We're trying to figure out, like, what do we need to fix on this document? What do we need to add? What do we need to delete, revise, so that the student can continue to make progress? So anytime, within a quarter, if we're seeing, they're not making progress in this area, we're back at the table and we're discussing that IEP again, and we're revising it again. So there's a lot of opportunities to come back to that document. and it doesn't always have to happen just at that annual cycle. There is times, within that annual cycle for us to come back and revise and edit and, even look at programming. Like, is this really working in terms of how this IEP is being implemented in this current setting?
Mm-hmm. I wanted to point out really quickly, you said about diagnosis. Now, it is so important that you, as parents, to get that diagnosis in order for it to even start the process. So you can talk to your child's pediatrician. You can talk to the pediatrician, and then they have to refer your child to see a specialist. Okay. So it's very important that you have that process. Once you get that, then make sure that you submit it to your child's school in order for them to implement it. And or they can even say, oh, I've been seeing some things with Jasmine. Let's but if you already kind of know, and parents, you kind of know a little bit, like, okay, we need to evaluate this. If you do it as a parent to the school, that documentation at whatever date. So June 17, 2020, Ms. Watson, here is my child's diagnosis. She has autism. What happens after that? That's that date of me contacting that school. They have how many days to get an IEP?
30 days.
30 days. 30 days.
So
it's so important.
And honestly, like, you don't even have to have a diagnosis per se. A concern is also warranted. A letter, you can write a letter and say, I am concerned about the progress that my child is making, and I would, like for the team to, look further into that. So that's, just a written request is all
Right
that takes to sort of start that process.
Yes.
The process might not always, end up in a diagnosis and an IEP, but it's starting that conversation. It's in the child's records, many times I'm at the middle school level, but many times when you look at a student's file, they've been identified, or there were concerns in kindergarten, and they may have held a meeting and put some interventions in place, and maybe there was some progress at that time, and so then it didn't move forward, but it still gives you access to other things, like I said, like some interventions and some other supports, because it doesn't always have to end up with an IEP, but you're also building a case, right? So
right.
In second grade, maybe they looked at it, but by fifth grade, that progress was still very limited. And so now we're coming back to the table, we're moving forward with, a formal assessment piece. So anytime I think, parents feel the weight of concerns, remember that you are a partner with your school. You're not an outside observer. You're a partner. I don't want to say like make the noise, but really you've got to make the noise, right? Like, you've got to say, because you are honestly the child's biggest advocate.
Yes. Okay. So here, another thing really quickly before we tie it to home. If you, so I am an ESL, English Second Language instructor and tutor, by the way, and I'm really into by next week. Actually, we're doing bilingual education. This is so awesome with the Let's Chat. But this is very important. If you don't have your first language as English, you can get a translator and your IEP. So important to ask for and that's before you get to the date of your IEP. They have to have a translator in place. So the draft that's going to come home is going to ask, do you need a translator? And click on yes. You can also invite on the draft one other person, or if you want to, who maybe have an expertise in what IEP. So again, all these terminologies that you may may have not known, now you know, but there might be other terminologies for someone who have expertise in this. Maybe invite them to the IEP meeting. So again, it's all tie into now, bring it on home, Jocelyn, of how parents can implement all of this. Special education is so important at home.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the child's learning needs and disability doesn't disappear when they walk out of the school building. And so that is part of who they are. And so you really need to, you know, partner with your school and provide that consistency for the student. You know, it is difficult in terms of the setting because, you know, you at home, it's not a controlled, structured setting. But you got to create as much structure as you can for, you know, your students, you know, give them time to get their homework done, you know, give them, you know, as much access as you can to what their IEP supports say, you know. Anything that's sent home in terms of homework should also have the modifications that the student, you know, requires. So, you know, if it's supposed to be enlarged font, you know, you should get homework that has enlarged font. If, you know, you're supposed to have sentence starters, you should have sentence starters. So, you know, that's one thing. If you're seeing the work that's coming home for the child to do at home doesn't relate to what's outlined on the IEP, make sure you ask for that, because that extension of their work into home is part of their IEP too, right? Because that's still their schoolwork. But, you know, for me, the greatest success for any of our students has been parents who partner with us, who know their child, who know their child's needs, you know, really do some research on what, you know, that diagnosis or that disability means to the student. You know, what is it going to look like at home for the student? You know, thinking about students with autism who might really need structure to, you know, to feel safe and to feel, you know, that consistency that they need. So make sure you try to build that in. You know, we get home at 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock, you have a snack. You know, at 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, you're going to do your homework. You know, you know, and part of it is just, that's just what we do as parents too, you know.
Right.
And there's times when that schedule is not going to be what it is because we've got a life to live. But really try to be, you know, as fluid in terms of what their needs are at school to home. On the reverse of that is, you know, sometimes kids need just, you know, when they get home because they've exhausted all their faculties, you know, at school to really keep up with the demands of work at school. And so if you're finding that your child is really exhausted at home, ask for that and say, you know, I don't see the benefit of homework, you know, at home, and it's okay. You know, that's something that you can outline on the IEP. You know, you can say limit homework because kids are exhausted, you know, after their day, and sometimes they just need to just relax.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because COVID-19, you know, everyone was on Zoom, and after class, she could do Zoom classes from 8:45 to 10:15 or 10:30, but after that, there was no homework because she was done. She was completely done. So I said, okay, well, we're going to just play games with it, you know, and I can review what is being presented, but as far as homework is concerned, she's not going to do it because was more of frustration that came through with that. So again, knowing your child, you know, what makes them go high to low, you know, is very important to like really get, you know, to observe that behavior and how they feel. And if they can tell you, definitely consider that, parents.
You know, I always encourage reading. I mean, read at home with your kids, you know, start early. I mean, we're talking about early intervention. I mean, that is so key. Put a book in their hand, you know, sit with them, help them turn the pages, help them look at the words. I mean, you want to talk about reading proficiency. That is the best way to start that for students is, getting them to interact with a book, not on an iPad, not on, like get a printed book, put it in their hands, have them look through it, ask questions. There's so much you can do, especially if there's like it's a picture book. You can ask questions about, what color pants are they wearing? How many cups are on the counter? Like, you're building math, you're building, color recognition, like all those early learning skills are already in there. And then you can ask questions, what do you think this boy is going to do, when he goes outside? So you're starting to build some of that critical thinking that,
right.
I'm going to tell you, that's all the curriculum is about, is, the inferential thinking and making predictions and, that kind of stuff. So, ask questions to your kids, even when you're out and about, doing grocery shopping, like, can you go get 3 peaches and put it in a bag? They're counting, they're looking for peaches, they're looking for signs. So you can build it into your, into your regular life all day long. It takes a lot. I was a speech pathology major before, but, I would look at parents who, baby talk is cute, but don't use baby talk with your kids. You want them to speak correctly. They might say Baba, and that's okay. They can say Baba. You don't have to correct them, but you say bottle. Oh, you want your bottle? Okay, let me go get your bottle.
Because now they're hearing it. They're going to hear it. I mentioned that yesterday on a page on Facebook, and I never talked to her as babyish. And she, personally about Jasmine and growing up, and she stopped babbling, you guys, like 6 months ago. She's 8. And all this time, it was direct. It was, a real conversation, and blah, 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 blah. Oh, you want this? You want that? And she'll try to say, like, when she was younger, apple, and apple, So that's very good and important for speech and language. Maybe you didn't know. Maybe you didn't get to the early intervention, but now it's always now is always the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's never too late.
The child could be 10 years old. Now is the right time. Yep. Don't worry about the past. Now is always the right time, because it will come. It will come when you start hearing and seeing and looking and thinking, whatever. It will come. Trust me, it will come. And to the point that's now, like, she's talking, but something you have to start off with the now, not think about the past, but the now. And this is why this chat was very useful, helpful, encouraging. I hope that you guys tell me how you feel. We're gonna thank Jocelyn Watson for this awesome chat. Yes, about special ed. And if you have any questions, please ask the question, and then I'm going to tag you, Jocelyn, on it, and then you can just have those conversations with individuals on Facebook. You want to say anything else before we go?
I just, I think I said it before. I think as parents, you have to understand what your rights are. I mean, there's a whole booklet that's lent to you guys and your rights. Make sure you get that. You're paying for your public school education, in your way. And so make sure that you're receiving those services. And partnering with your school is number one. I know there's lots of limitations, with schedules and work and all that stuff. But when we say stakeholders and we put parents in that, we really do mean that. I mean, it's not just, for say, especially when it comes to students with disabilities. Parent advocates, really do help make that progress for the students.
Yes. And speaking of parent advocates, Let's Chat will be having a parent coming soon to be announced, an actual parent who is 100% advocate for for her child who has autism. So we're gonna be talking about that soon and some other topics. And we want to thank Mrs. Watson for everything.
I haven't heard that in a long time. Miss Watson. It's been 3 months.
Mrs. Watson for everything that come along with today. We are really good friends, and I know she has seen and take I have taken heed of what she's been saying personally to me with Jasmine growing up. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. Until next time, you guys, next week, bilingual education. Until next week, I will see you guys. Have an awesome day. And again, share it with your family and friends about special ed. Thank you.